Yep, absolutely. So I wanted to talk to you because you had said earlier you're not Leslie Stahl, but you do partake in some hard hitting journalism, Brian.
I try.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So one of the biggest concerns, which was a surprise for me, and we had just talked about this a little bit earlier before we started hitting record, was that a lot of folks are very hesitant to take part in these opportunities because they're afraid of those gotcha questions
Right.
or not knowing the answer to the question. And for me, I see that as a disservice because, we work specifically in STEM and some of the coolest innovations are happening in the space. And if people are afraid to do media opportunities like this, a lot of people miss out on some really cool information.
Yeah.
So can you make us feel better about this?
Well, I mean, it's difficult, right? The corporate environment is so conservative. They don't,
Yes.
and the liability is a big issue. And with guests, they don't want to do something or say something that's going to go viral. I mean, there's nothing is in a vacuum anymore, right? So
No.
I understand why people are hesitant, but you also have to understand, unless I don't know, unless you're going to divulge a patent or something like that. I mean, I don't know what type of stuff it is, but, and again, I only use personal experience. When I started off in sports, I was so nervous, and my boss said, like, in your 2 minutes, nobody dies. So don't worry about it. Like, I mean, if
That's a
your
good point.
stuff like isn't, like, if you're worried about liability, that's a little trickier. If you're just worried about looking stupid, then that's different. Like, it's okay to not know something. You don't have
Yeah.
to be perfect. And I think once you put that aside, and I think the problem with like your scientists or your other folks is that they have so many people in their ear telling them what they can and can't say, that of course, I mean, and plus it's like if I was asked to go into a lab and start an experiment, I'd probably soil myself, you know what I mean? And so like, it's not what they do, right? And I
No,
understand
no.
that, but like you and like media training is to get them to understand that it's not something to fear, especially if there's not like national security or state
Yeah,
secrets involved. And I mean, sometimes people tend to
100%.
overinflate the importance of what they're doing.
Hmm.
And I think that sometimes you just have to, calm them down. But I think this mostly a fear of embarrassment if they're not comfortable with it. And actually, I'm sure that you do this, but I think the more, it's not practice, but like even I used to think mock interviews or role plays were dumb, and they're not. And they can be really, really helpful. Even if you're 60% and fully engaged in it, it gives you a sense of the pivots and gives you a sense of the thoughts and places if you get caught where you can go. And I
Hmm.
actually think that that's really important, because media stuff is a skill as much as a talent. It really
Yep.
is.
I agree. And you're totally right where nothing you do, even if you're going to go in and have a conversation, the first time you say something shouldn't be in front of say a reporter or the interviewee that you're giving like that you're talking with, like practicing answers, even though you're not going to try and memorize them, but just being comfortable
Right.
like saying what you want to say in a really weird environment can be really helpful.
So you
Like
work that into the stuff you do?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. And I mean, how weird is it if you're doing a remote interview and you're staring into the black hole of a camera? Or,
Yeah.
you're on the phone doing a radio interview and you're not looking at anybody. Like all of those things can feel very unnatural to a person. So,
Right.
doing these mock interviews and trainings, I think is really helpful to get people more familiar and comfortable.
Staring into a camera or looking, being on the phone is way easier than speaking in front of people, I find. And so I think you can actually look at it
It's interesting.
as almost like a more, you should actually flip it on them. It's actually in some ways more safe. I mean, I'm more
Yeah,
nervous doing a
that's a good
live shot in
point.
front of 5 people than I am, you know, doing nightly news with Lester Holt, looking straight into a camera with no idea.
Really? That's really interesting, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, I was more nervous doing a live interview before a high school football game than doing like the Today Show for some reason. I don't know
Holy
why.
cow.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's the anonymity of the camera.
Yeah,
You know?
and I was nervous for all of it. I'm not going to tell you I wasn't nervous to do some sort of talkbacks with on larger audience and so on and so forth. But I don't know. There's something about even like doing it in studio. Like I remember, I'll just say, like I did nightly news with Lester Holt a couple. When I used to be like the weekend guy, so all the big names would do the weekday news, but like when Lester Holt did the weekend nightly news, they wouldn't pay for a live shot, so they wouldn't have a crew come to your house. So if you were willing to come in the city, they put you on TV. And so doing that compared to the few times I did that with a Today Show, which is it's still a smaller operation on the weekends, but you have to come in the city, but there's a lot of people there. So like, that would make me nervous. Like being in a studio with all those people, that's, even though I was on TV every day, that made me nervous. Something about real people being near you is way different than looking in a camera.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. I didn't think about it that way for sure. And
That's
it's just
just
like
me,
all
but
these people
everybody
like
can be
staring
different.
at you waiting.
Yeah, people can be different, but when real people are like looking at me,
It's a lot.
it's
Yeah.
more nervous.
So Brian, what would you consider a successful interview? Like when you have a guest on, what would you want, or what would you want to include, or basically even just consider as
Yeah.
a good time?
The first thing is that thing I said, his name was Mike McQuaid, who said, tell me something I don't know. Like, I want listeners to come away with something, just something. It could be a nugget. Now, this is the interesting thing with me as a host. It doesn't necessarily have to be information. It could be something funny, or, I don't try to make people laugh, but something that was humorous, like that they can come away with something that's different than the reason why people listen or watch is that they want to feel good or learn something, right? So those are the two things I try to deliver, and I want it to be real. I mean, I try to you can't do it every time, and some people just, you can't do it, but like so a successful interview is something where I inform or entertain and give people a slice of real life, and that's where I have this hang up, obviously, as you know, in this short conversation with the talking point side of things. And listen, I deal with talking point people, every single day, but, in terms of what makes a successful interview, it gives something they don't know, or make them feel good about something, and have them feel like they heard real people talking to them. It's really that simple for me.
Yeah, that's a good formula. Really,
it doesn't always work, and I find that now that I've been doing it for a while in this chair, I have to remind myself that, somebody could be listening for the first time, or maybe they weren't listening 2 hours ago. And it's not that I get complacent, but you have to really fight complacency, right? And so if you have clients who do this, maybe you have a client who's doing the same interview, or an interview on the same topic with 6 different people in one day. They have to really fight that autopilot.
Yes.
And I think
absolutely.
that's what I try to. So a successful interview, I don't want somebody listening feeling like either one of us went through the motions.
Yeah. And it's true, when you're doing so many, it's so easy for you to go on autopilot. And if you don't have a good interviewer, they'll let you go on autopilot. And then it doesn't turn out as successful as another interview would be.
And most, like a lot of hosts don't care. Sometimes you're just filling the 2.5 minutes for them, or so on and so forth. And that's where sort of knowing who your host is, or whatever, you have to read that too. Because if this man or woman is really disinterested, then it's a little bit different. It's not your job to engage them, but you know what you got. So sometimes that makes it a little more difficult. But when you have someone who's engaging, you should just go. I ultimately with people, I can't help them with their nerves, but if they can just find a way to be real people, and with the STEM stuff, I know I don't want to be stereotypical, but people are so committed to what they're doing, sometimes that they're just not involved in those other elements as much. And that I can see why they would be nervous about it.
Yeah. And also with STEM, one of the one of the main things that we work on is simplifying science, right? Because science can be deeply, deeply technical, but very meaningful. And there's this concern of when you simplify science, you misconstrue it, and then it leads to inaccuracy. So there's like this constant balance of, how are you talking about this? Does the general public understand what you're saying? And how can we kind of get in the middle without the scientist worrying about their science being portrayed as inaccurate, and then also making sure that the folks who are listening really understand.
Right. There's a fine line about getting too much in the weeds, but also you don't want to insult people's intelligence, because then you get in the danger of like local news, but going too shallow and not deep
100%.
enough, right? And that's a problem too.
It's true. And you know, I worked with this guy who was an editor for a science journal, and he was like, people are really smart. We don't need to dumb stuff down a lot. Like
I don't think
and
so.
because we are smart people and we can figure it out, especially with context, right? So, you know, I don't
And,
think that's too much of a pressure.
you know, I'm just sort of brainstorming, thinking aloud, but I also think that, you know, when you think about memorizing or when people get more experience, I think like real life metaphors are always really helpful too. Like, I don't
Hmm.
know what sort of instances it would help with the people you work with, but anytime you can sort of make a comparison to people's day-to-day lives or what they normally would look at
Yeah,
is super helpful.
agreed.